Hi friends, this is Kim from Creative DIY Purpose. Welcome. Today I will give a new makeover to items that didn't sell the first time. And you'll have to let me know with each one if it's a hit or you think it's going to be a miss again. Our first remake today is a small wooden tray. I originally sanded this thrifted tray, applied a transfer, some clear wax, and white wax. I had it listed for $6.99. And it was in my booth for quite a few months, and I did put it in different displays. So I really like the tray that we did last week using one of the graphics over at Betty's shop, 2x4 block printables on Etsy. Last week we used the cow image. This week, let's try the chicken and eggs one. The first step was to take some fine grit sandpaper and sand the entire piece, and applied 2 coats to the entire piece using Dixie Belle's silk paint in the color Anchor. And that's the color that I'm going to use on 7 of the projects today. While the tray is drying, I upload the image using Canva, size it to the correct size that I need, print it out on a brown paper bag, and I have this tissue paper. It actually came from my order from thestencilsmith.com. I dip my paintbrush in water and run it around the inside lip of the tray and then tear along the edges. I want a little bit of that black paint to show through. And I really like the look of this. I thought it would be a little bit different than what we did last week. So I had the torn edges of the brown paper bag, and I thought, since the tissue paper was torn along the edges, I'll cut that graphic out. And then using some of the decoupage gel from Redesign, I layered them one on top of the other. Then I applied decoupage gel over the entire top and touched up any areas that I felt needed a little bit more. So doing the same step that we did last week, I'm taking some Waverly antique wax, applying it with a paintbrush, and then we'll wipe it back with a cloth. Both of the trays, along with some of the items we did last week and the items from this week, will be put together to create a vignette in my new booth that I will share with you guys next week. Once the piece has a chance to dry, I'll spray the entire thing with 2 coats of the Rust-Oleum spray sealer in matte finish. Here's a look at the before, and now here's a look at the after. You guys will have to let me know which one you prefer and if you think this one will sell. For project number 2, we will give a makeover to this little wooden vintage box. I think it was some type of a musical instrument. I cannot remember. And when I tried to do a Google image search, it wouldn't pop up. But I had originally dry brushed with some white paint and added a transfer. And then I think I had a vintage picture that I printed out from the graphicsfairy.com displayed in there. So I thought we would go a little bit different. Again, 2 coats of the black paint and then lightly just dress the edges. And once I had a chance to dry, I'll apply one of the redesigned vintage labels on the front. So same thought as I had last time, only I'm hoping to kick this one up a notch when it comes to decorating it. After I applied the transfer, I decided to take 2 sprigs of some leftover greenery that I had and tuck it right down inside. Then taking a sheet of vintage music, and actually that is the piece of cardstock that came from those labels. I figured I would reuse it. Cut up any extra of the piece of cardstock, and then apply some glue stick, a lot of glue stick, and stick that sheet of music right on top of there. It ended up fitting in that slot perfectly and left just enough room for the greenery on the side. All right, so I purchased these transfers a few years ago from the Dollar Tree. I thought a couple of them would look nice in the middle of the music. You could also run that music with the cardstock through your printer and add an image onto the center. But I had these on hand and thought I'd give them a try. I tied some lace ribbon around the greenery and decided to take some copper gilding wax from Dixie Belle and run that around the edges of the music and around the edges of the wood block. I like the result that I get better by applying the gilding wax with my finger, but you just have to be careful and wash your hands right after, not touch anything, or else you'll end up with gilding wax all over. Last step was to take a black vintage button and hot glue it onto the ribbon. Do you like the way that this one turned out? And what would you have added to complete this piece? For our third remake today, we'll be working on this primitive riser. This was a decorative checkerboard that I glued onto a wooden block. I purchased a set of those wooden blocks. I believe that they're feet. They can be used as feet for something. That's what they look like after I sanded them down. They had a heavy stain and polyurethane on them, so I sanded them down, added it to this piece, and today we're going to use the Black Crow from the stencilsmith.com. Don't forget, when you order from there, to type in creative DIY and save 15%. Because the stencil was a little bit bigger than the piece I was working on, I decided just to go with the word crow up at the top. The paint that I'm using is acrylic paint by Apple Barrel. This took me a little bit to figure out how I wanted to do the placement. I decided to leave a space in the middle for the crow. So I'm using the word seeds down at the bottom, and then 2 coats of black paint for the crow in the middle. I did add a coat of paint along the edges of the top tray and the wood block. It looked like it had got dropped or scraped a few times, and the distressing was a little too heavy. After that had dried, I decided to take the little sunflower in the Black Crow stencil. I had both the brown paint and the gold still sitting next to me, and I thought it'd be cute to paint on some little sunflowers on each side of the wood block. I'm happy with the way those came out. Next, I'll cover the entire piece with some Best Dang wax, and this is clear. I will apply it over the entire piece and then wipe it back with a lint-free cloth. And of course, after I got that all done, I realized, oh shoot, that crow is way too light. I used the same black paint that I used to paint him the first time, but this time I added some baking soda to it. So I applied 3 coats, allowing each one to dry in between, and this was a textured paint. All I did was add a little bit of baking soda in with the paint, and that worked. What I don't show in the video is I went along that white edge and added some antique wax from Waverly, and I think that this one came out okay. All right, so do you like the first version or the second better? And tell me, what would you have added to this piece or done differently? All right, so please don't laugh at this next one. I don't know what I was thinking. It was a very heavily distressed wooden trivet. I sold a lot of plant stands and plant plates and anything to go under plants. And I had a few of these wooden trivets. I painted them different colors. Anyway, it didn't sell. I see why it didn't sell. We're going to apply 2 coats of the black paint all over the entire piece, and we're going to take it from there. I gave the entire piece 2 coats of paint. Once I had a chance to dry, I took 4 wooden blocks from a Jenga game, and we're going to use some wood glue and add little feet, and that'll give the riser a little height. I like to apply my wood glue using a brush. I think it makes it a little easier to control. Once they were glued on there, I made sure that they were even. I let it dry, and when I came back and looked at it, I decided to brush on some of the antique wax from Waverly and wipe that back. And it needed a little something else for character. So I added some of the Waverly wax along the inside part there. Let it sit on there for a few minutes and wiped it back, and it needed a little something else. Had some fine grit sandpaper. I went very gently around the edges and then all along inside of those cutout pieces in the middle. Then took a cloth and wiped that all off and dipped my paintbrush back into the antique wax and went along the edges in every place that I lightly distressed and wiped that back. Definitely not super exciting, but I think it looks a lot better than what it did. So next project, I have these two white ceramic pitchers. I believe that the one little creamer is originally from Target. I did purchase it at a local thrift store. And then I love this pitcher, and I paid only $2.99 for it, which is really rare around here. I actually want to keep it, but the creamer was in my booth for a long time. I decided instead of putting a transfer on the front of them like I usually do, I decided to fill them up with some greenery. For the larger pitcher, I took some lamb's ear and two of the spindles left over from one of my chair projects. I left them with a rough edge. I did not trim that off or make it even. And I thought that gave it a little bit of a rustic feel. I decided to, I was struggling here. I decided to put them together and tie them with some of that lace ribbon and tied them together with a symbol bow. When I placed them inside the pitcher, there was some empty space. So I took some of the leftover sprigs of greenery that I had and tucked them inside of that ribbon. So here's what it looked like. I tried to make it nice and full, and I will use some glue to make sure that that stays all together. Now for the little creamer, I put some of the sprigs of greenery in a piece of floral foam that I purchased from the Dollar Tree, and that seemed to work out well. Next, we're going to give a makeover to one of the wooden mini crates. I had this in my booth, and all I did was put some IOD stamps on either side, and I believe that we had plants that were displayed inside of them. So I took some of the black anchor paint, added some white, watered it down, and made like a gray wash. I was thinking that I wanted it to look like pallet wood or like weathered fence boards. But I wanted it to be light enough where you could still see the ink stamps on either side of them. So I brushed on the watered down paint mixture and then wiped it in with a cloth and repeated it in areas that I wanted a little bit darker. And I did that to the entire piece, including underneath. In the center of the box, we're going to add 3 small canning jars. A friend gave them to me, and there's a little bit of spray paint on them, so I can't use them to can with. But see the canning jar lids there, how one of them is tarnished? That is because I added vinegar into my canner, and I love the way that they come out looking aged, but I had to age the other one. I put some apple cider vinegar in a saucepan with a little bit of water and the jar lid, and I brought it to boil and then let it sit in the water for a while. And it didn't come out as dark, but I'm sure if I would have been patient and had it in there for a while, it would have been. And I have some dried lavender from my garden, and it smells so good. And I like the way that this came out, but I need some ideas. What would you have done? Or would you have put anything on the front of that? How would you have decorated it? Because I do have one more that's very similar to this one, and I would love to take some ideas and share that in a future video. For our next project, I upcycled this wooden recipe box, and I had it in my booth for quite a while. It didn't sell. I did paint it black and then do a dry brush, and maybe the dry brush was a little bit too strong, so I thought, well, I'll try to tone that down. Of course, as I'm looking back over this video and editing, I thought, you know, instead of painting pretty much the whole thing again, I should have just made up a black paint wash, applied it with that paintbrush, and then wiped it back with a cloth. over the areas, like over the transfers, to have them show through. I think it would have saved a lot of time. But anyway, so I took the black paint, went over on the sides and the trim, and left the front and the top pretty much as they were. I did towards the end lightly paint over the transfers and then wipe that back a little bit with a cloth. And I think the change was really subtle, but I think it was just enough to give it a cleaner finished look. What do you guys think? Next, we're going to give a new look to a decorative cutting board, and this one kind of bummed me out. I cannot believe that this did not sell. It was $7.99 in my booth. I had it for a year. I tried staging it with all different things. I purchased it at a thrift store and it was hand painted, and the person did a beautiful job. And I even had a sale in my booth for almost a month for 25% off. I put it right in the front. Oh, I was so bummed. It's so beautiful. But anyway, I've got to get things moving, and I thought the piece itself was cut really nice. So I thought, well, we'll give it a primitive look, painted it black, lightly distressed around the edges. I ran out of burlap, or else I would have done a different bow. But that was one that was just cut to look like a bow, and I glued an acorn on. And I had it in with my supplies, figured might as well use it. Wrap some twine up around the neck of the cutting board, and we're going to hot glue that back of that bow right up there. Super simple. And then these tags I have available for you over on my blog. It's a free printable, and they have kind of a primitive look to them. You can make them into any size that you'd like using an app like Canva. Here I'm applying a little bit of black wax and a little bit of copper gilding wax. We're going to attach that on there with some jute. And I made a little jute hanger on the back. It's not as pretty as before, but I did need something plain to go in my new display, which I'll share with you guys next week. So real quick, two of the things that I was working on this week is, you guys might remember the table that I was working on with someone. There were 2 lines on the decoupage paper on the top. And I couldn't. I tried covering it up, and the more that I tried fixing it, the worse that it came out. I tried antique wax. I tried sanding it. I tried heat. Anyway, when I went to take the decoupage paper off, it was an actual line that ran underneath the paper. So I definitely missed that when I was sanding. But anyway, I took off the decoupage paper, sanded it, and applied another sheet, and now it's ready to go up for sale. So you guys may have remembered this butterfly chair that I put in my booth a few months back. It did not sell. So I sanded off the butterflies, kept the lotus in the middle, used a few stencils from the stencilsmith.com, and I love how this one came out. What do you guys think? Friends, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a super blessed week, and I will see you next Monday at 7 p.m.